Phil Gore, you are back. How are you, sir? Dr. Phil Gore.
Hey, Matt. I'm doing great, and I'm thrilled to be back. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody can be asked once, right? So it's a real honor to be asked back.
And again, I really, really enjoyed. I have told so many people about our conversation regarding the public value of public education, not just the public value, but the individual value proposition.
Both.
And it is so remarkable that it's taken me this long to hear the value of public education articulated the way you did. And the individual person, if you're a 65-year-old, you're a 70-year-old, maybe you never had kids, maybe your kids are old. It's like, okay, great. If you live another 20 years, do you want prostitutes and thieves knocking on your door? No, you don't. No. And if we don't have people that are armed with other value sets to offer the world, that's what we end up with, right? Like if we taught every single kid in the entire community computer science, welding, and nursing, all of them, nobody would ever not have a job. They would all either be, you can go into tech, you go in medicine, you go, whatever it is. People wouldn't have a need for theft. People wouldn't have a need for this like base level of prostitution where it's like, this is all I have to offer the world. No. Yeah. You have other things. So I know we started off kind of hot here, but
no, it's great.
I loved that from our last conversation.
Well, we're starting with why, right? Which is really critical. And I probably can't emphasize what a great need there is to have that conversation all across Idaho, like at a state level and in every individual community. Why? Why do we have public schools? What are we trying to accomplish, right? And so we've got those three main points. We need a productive workforce, which is both a public good and a private good. People that add to the economy and take care of themselves. We need educated citizens who can think critically, analyze problems, solve problems, contribute to the greater good. And then I know we didn't delve into this enough last time, but we need to also equip our children with the ability to pursue the American dream. That idea that a person can rise above the circumstances into which they were born. Like when we equip them with that sort of the aspirational and the knowledge and skills to do it, right? Then our children can soar. But we've got to equip them. And to your earlier point, not just some of them, but all of them, right? Students, children, young people become a liability if they can't provide for themselves, if they don't have the value of public participation in the greater good, right? So it's so critical, that foundation of starting with why. Why public education?
Well, again, you hit it out of the park. And I obviously wanted to talk to you again. Yeah. So, we got lined up today. We're going to chat about school board. So what I think is interesting is, I actually cut my teeth in podcasting in interviewing school board candidates back in my former state. Yeah. So I had started this podcast, and it originally was just kind of a fun thing for my SAT students because, they needed something to listen to on the way to school. So I do these 10-minute thought bubblegum episodes where it's like, do you like tea? It's like, oh yeah, I love tea. It's like, okay, do you love tea if it's cold? They're like, no, man, I'm not drinking. It was like, okay, so you don't love tea always. You only break it down, have little
semantics versus what do we really mean?
Yes, exactly. And, so it'd be a bunch of those little episodes, like 5 a week, and they listen to them on the way to school. But what really happened is as turmoil entered into our community in 2020, we had this huge problem in the public school system with the public schools were still closed. The private schools were going back. People were losing their minds. And we also had a school board election that fall, right? So I think it was like August or September, all of a sudden I started interviewing people. So I interviewed one person. I knew nothing about school boards. I didn't know that school boards directed the district and primarily hired the superintendent. I didn't know any of that.
Sure.
And so I interviewed one person and I was like, wow, everything she says really makes sense. And then very fortunately, I interviewed the person who had been on the school board for 20 years. And he gave me a perspective of like, oh my God, I had no idea about any of this. And, again, that was really the start of, okay, you need to remain objective. You need to constantly be learning. And you have to hear all sides. Yeah. That's where I started really getting into intense interviews. As I moved up here, again, continued with school boards and other types of interviews. But it's so amazing to me how little people know about the school board. The school boards in general came into people's attention during COVID because they're like, wait, who's running these schools? Who's running these districts?
Yep.
everyone started running for school boards. School boards became a hub where you could start a political career if you wanted to, even if you had no interest in
Right.
public education.
Yeah.
So people wanted access to these school boards for all kinds of reasons, either to start a political career, to change the curriculum in the school, to, do all of these things. And here we find ourselves like several years into it, several rounds of elections into it. And it's like, it has not stopped.
Well, you're throwing out so many different topics. Like it's hard to know where to grab. And I almost
let's just start.
I started wondering if I should be interviewing you. Really, I mean, because this is beautiful. But let's back up just a little bit. Small amount of history about public education and school boards. School boards have been around since the 1600s. In the state of Massachusetts, they were called selectmen. They were all men. There was a collective of people who were brought together to facilitate public education. Now, it was only boys, only men on the school board, only boys being educated. And it was kind of a cooperative, if you will. It was, just an initial, let's come together, pool our resources, make sure there's enough firewood. It's your turn next month to house the head teacher, and I'll take it next. It was that kind of very hands-on collaborative. Out of that has evolved the modern notion of a school board, but school boards haven't changed much in about 150 years. So they changed a little bit early on. And what's funny here, and you just made me think of it, school boards have been criticized since the very beginning. There's a quote sometimes I'll use with new school board members. Often there's not a lot of laughter, but Mark Twain said, "First God made idiots," and that was for practice. And then he made school boards. So, we're talking mid 1800s, right? That didn't end. School boards are still criticized today from every direction. There was an article in the Atlantic magazine, 2009, that the headline, cover story, "First Kill All the School Boards." And so it's become in some circles, both in academics or, if you will, in some of the universities and foundations have, pulled out school boards to say, oh, here's the problem. And then sometimes locally, right? There's the local politics, whether it has to do with curriculum, football coach, runs the gamut. The intriguing thing is, generally in the history, nobody cares who's on the school board. But then when they care, they really care.
They really care. That's what, and again, I don't mean to interrupt, but that's the exact position that my former community found itself in. This gentleman by the name of Greg Marvel, who had been on the school board for 20 years. We had like the lowest maintenance budgets, and they were making these broad investments for like 50-year metal roofs instead of the 30-year roofs. They were working around the bus system so that they needed fewer bus drivers. They were doing all of these different things. And then everyone cared about returning kids to school, and then everyone cared. Greg had run unopposed for 20 years. Nobody had a problem with the way the school was being run, all these things. We found ourselves in the situation, and now 3 people were running for one spot. It was wild.
Well, in our environment today, and especially post-COVID, right, there were a lot of flashpoints that had to do with public schools because I think people, even some public policymakers, didn't realize how much of our society, our economy, everything about what we do revolves on having a local public schoolhouse where kids are taken care of during the day and needs are met, often for food, et cetera. And then all of a sudden we didn't have it in that form, and people were coming out of their skin. What am I going to do now? I can't teach my kid at home and also be online doing my job, or much less leave home. And, and even teachers had the same conundrum, right? Where they're trying to teach a class on Zoom, and then they've got their own kids in the background sucking up the Wi-Fi.
My blood pressure's going up. I can't.
Right?
I can't
trying to learn at the same time.
Yeah.
But this notion of school boards, while they've been oft criticized, and sometimes with good reason, that nobody's got a better structure, right? There's not some other sort of elite academic or highly educated people that they can appoint to school boards and get better outcomes. Local elected volunteer citizens tend to be governing systems that are producing the best results. And since the late 1800s, we've gone with this little pendulum swing, particularly in large urban districts, of having appointed boards. And what we found was appointed boards in a place like Chicago, New York, whatever, they become way more politicized and way less qualified, right? Because the way the system works is it's expert citizens serving on the school board. It's not educational experts, it's not legal experts, it's not financial accounting experts, but it's expert citizens. People who can sit across from the table and have good conversations, sometimes about the most difficult things. And so that ties in with kind of, when we think about school board elections, well, who do we want to vote for? Is it the person that has our same personal agenda, maybe our philosophical, religious, moral beliefs about the way the world works? Or is it a person who's got the maturity, regardless of age, right? The maturity, the decency to work collaboratively with other people that see the world differently than we do? Great. There's so many aspects to this, and I don't want to just drone on, but one of the pieces we can talk about is representation, right? Because school boards nationally have been criticized in recent decades for not adequately representing the public. Now, whether that's based on race, on gender, socioeconomic, or other kind of backgrounds, one of the intriguing things that my professors struggled with was the fact that school boards are the most representative of any other elected body of officials in the country, right?
What does that mean? Explain that to me.
So like if we looked at the U.S. Congress, pick the Senate, right? You're way likely to have an extremely wealthy old white male.
Okay.
Serving in Senate. No offense to our senators. It's just a reality,
sure.
Right? And so as you look at that, people have criticized and said, regardless whether it's urban areas, rural areas, suburban, the school board doesn't really represent our community. We don't have enough Black, enough Hispanic, enough Asians, in some places, enough women. Like, it's not representative. Well, there's some truth to that, although it's kind of eroding, but it's also what's more important, right? Just because you have a person of color or from one particular group sitting at the board table doesn't mean that they're actually advancing experiences, opportunities, and outcomes for children that come from that group. That's been a dilemma that some of us have been trying to wrestle with for the last 10 to 15 years, as there was a lot of push for more diversity on school boards. The reality was, again, just because you come from a certain group, you've probably already developed the social capital to be somewhat removed from a group that we thought of as disenfranchised, marginalized, not well representative. So we just struggled with that, again, particularly in urban areas from policy. It's like, yeah, representation's important. I think it's important for kids to see, as well as adults, that, you too can be a school board member, right? That's great. And how do we also advance, right, the service to all children?
Right. So me as a Hispanic, right? So believe it or not,
great example.
My dad's 100% Mexican.
Yeah.
Both my grandparents came from Mexico. So I'm 50% Mexican,
Yep.
right? So I get elected to the school board, and I get elected to the school board and saying, hey, I'm 50% Mexican. I think that, I want to help all children, of course, but I also bring my own unique experience as a Hispanic male.
Right.
And then the result is, yeah, you may be Hispanic, Matt, and you may be on the school board, but the benefits and opportunities and service to the Hispanic community didn't really change while you were on the school board.
Right.
Like,
right.
It's all the same.
Right. You still have the same policies, same budget, same teacher assignments, right?
Right.
That's the point. It's like, having the school board more representative of different subgroups within the community doesn't necessarily change or benefit
different subgroups in the community.
Yeah, right. So, and then the challenge is, most of us, when we join a school board, we think of ourselves like a delegate, right? So a delegate, I was a precinct committee man when I was very young. You go to the conventions and you vote the way you were told. You don't, we deal with this every 4 years with the Electoral College, right? Well, could they, should they, would they? No, they all show up and vote the way they're told because they're a delegate. Most people think of themselves like a delegate when they join a school board, and gradually over time begin to think of themselves as a trustee. And there's a huge difference. It's not just a word, but am I here to represent a singular interest or a singular subset of students and families? Or am I here to represent the whole? And trustees recognize that they're stewards of the community's trust, the community's two most precious resources, their kids and their money, right? And trustees think in terms of what is that greater good, that long-term good. Trustees think, how do we get the most benefit, put the metal roof on so we've got the 50-year lifestyle cycle, right? Not the immediate patch or short-term gain of what's cheaper, but trustees think in terms of let's see the big picture, and delegates often focus on minor issues or singular issues.
And I'm sorry to cut you off there, but in the case of the metal roof, things of long-term nature with broader benefit that is not immediately readily apparent on first observation. Those are things that make trustee-facing individuals particularly vulnerable to short-term, demagogue-style attacks of like, he's blowing all this money. It's well, hang on. In the first 10 years, it may look like that, but if we look at a 50-year time frame, we're racking it in year 11 to 50. And if I'm looking at the broader picture beyond my 4-year term and getting reelected, I have to look at the 50-year time frame. If I'm just looking at the first, hey, I just need to get reelected, slap a patch on. But we know it's going to cost us double in 6 years if we don't do it now.
Go buy some snow seal or whatever, the modern versions of the product. So here's the challenge for communities, right? So nationally, less than 15% of the public registered voters vote in school board elections. Like in some cities and certain demographics, it tends to be higher, 40, 50, 60%. But generally, you're just pulling teeth to get people to actually even check a box at the bottom of the ballot for people, especially if they don't know them or don't really have a care or concern, right? So how do we get the public to care when it's not just an emotionally charged issue like a mask or not a mask, or a certain book in the library or not, or a certain curriculum or teaching, or how do we get the public to care when it's not about evolution versus creationism, or it's not about segregation versus integration? How do we get the public to care about advancing better outcomes, better opportunities, more success for all of our kids? That's a little tricky. It just doesn't hit the passionate button like social media kind of reaction. Right.
And it's not, if you're not going after a singular issue, then it's very hard to assess efficacy and even determine, like,
it's so tough.
So right now we're coming to the end of our legislative session for the state of Idaho, right?
Yeah.
And there are a lot of people that had one issue that are trying to paint the legislative body as a whole or individual legislators as failing because this one issue, like, we increased the budget. I think we increased the budget overall by 14% or something like that. Okay. Now, mind you, we had an unbelievable fire season last year. The governor asked for $30 million for water research. Like, I could go through, like a bunch of different things.
Item by item.
Item by item. Our population's growing. Things are getting more expensive. Just inflation alone would account for like 3 to 5% of that, 14%, all these things. And the bottom line is, if you look at it from that monotopic lens, then you're going to see like this grand failure. But if you look at the broader, like, okay, but like cross industry, like if we look at like the 6 biggest industries in Idaho, like if we just look at law enforcement, education, agriculture, like how are we doing like per those industries? And if those industries are like, no, we're good. Like, this is great. Like we have investment, like blah, blah, blah. Then it becomes very complex. You just can't orient yourself quickly and easily if you go outside of like, all I care about is the budget.
Well, and I admittedly, when I joined a school board, I had no concept how complex public education is. Like I really didn't know the different pieces of title funds and what was federal money, state money, local money, grant money, where all the different revenue streams came from, much less all the different expenses. You know, typically in a school district, about 85% is fixed cost and salaries and benefits, and you really don't have any discretion. So people that think they're going to join the school board and reduce spending or transform the budget, they're in fantasy island. I mean, they're just living a fantasy, right? But they'll they'll campaign on those kind of things, and then good and bad, you know, they get on a school board and realize, oh, well, I didn't realize that. Well, I didn't know that, right? But to your point, in order to get elected, especially when it's really contested election, sometimes you have to put yourself out there on very singular cultural or moral type issues.
You got to push the button.
Yeah, that's not about the greater good. And the challenge then becomes, you know, certainly administrators and fellow board members get really nervous about those candidates who are saying, you know, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And people that know, well, actually, you can't do that. They're like, you know, now what? It's good job security for me, working in school board development. Election years are always great. At some point in August, superintendents and boards are looking up saying, oh, what are we going to deal with come November, January?
Yeah, right.
You know, people that are running on an agenda to fire the superintendent or worse yet, fire a coach. You know, it's like, how are we going to get the help we need? And oftentimes we can help those folks by bringing the board together and having a conversation about what matters most.
Right. Yeah. And speaking to complexity, West Ada worked really hard to revamp its bus drop-off schedule and tweak all that. Now, mind you, complexity, you have people that don't come from transportation sitting on this board and, you know, bright people, capable people that are trying to iron out nuances of the largest transportation system in the state of Idaho. Like if it's not, it's like absolutely a hot second, but like it's first or second largest number of people traveling per day, number of stops, number of things, and their children, right? Like you have all of these things that are going into this public transportation or the school transportation system. And it's all being hashed out by the people on the school board who aren't like, you know, the transportation engineers, you know, and they hire people, consultants and everything.
Hopefully not. Like, right. Hopefully they're not transportation engineers. Again, the system is designed for them to be expert citizens. So how do they balance then? What do we get from the experts that we hire, that we pay to be able to research this, come up with the best plan to maximize the dollars and benefit to the public? And then the individual parent who's screaming mad as any one of us would be if, you know, their kindergartner falls asleep on the back of the bus and isn't dropped off because the bus driver can't see them. That happens, right? It just happens. It happens everywhere. And policies and practices are put in place to try to prevent it to happen, but inevitably stuff goes wrong. Every now and then there's a bus accident, right? Every now and then there's a tragic bus incident, right? And those things become then flashpoints that they're really not within the role and expertise of a lay elected citizen school board, right? How does the board have the conversation that brings the needs together with the expert advice, make the best decision they can make on the facts presented? That's the role of a school board.
And to your earlier articulation that school boards have been this thing that are much reviled and have been for some time, the alternative is not great.
No.
Right? Like the alternative of let's have no expert citizen representation. Let's have I had a Representative Weber in recently who ran a bill on HOAs. Okay, because there's a problem in the state of Idaho with HOAs, specifically that the HOAs are controlled by the developer as the development is going on. And only essentially as like the last house is built, do the homeowners actually get representation on the HOA. I think it's like a 95% barrier or something like that. Yeah. And they don't have to, and this might matter to you if you were sold a house in a community that said, hey, we're going to have this incredible amenity. We're going to have this 3-story community center with like an Olympic pool, all of these things. And you're like, oh, that's great. You buy the house, you're expecting the pool, and they're like, yeah, we'll have it by the end of the next 15 years, right? Because its development is slotted to take 15 years and they don't have to finish. They don't have to finish the last time. So he runs this bill because, again, homeowners don't have representation. There's a development a few miles north of here called Avamore that they're not slotted to be done with construction for the next 20 to 30 years. And okay, so everybody buying houses in Avamore, no one's going to have a homeowner representation on the homeowner association. So again, the alternative to having a school board of expert citizens and duly elected representatives of the community is you don't have any control over it. And like, we can be as mad as we want at the school board members over the last 5 years and say like, we should have voted them out or we should have done this about. What would you be saying if we didn't even have a say?
Right.
That's bonkers to me.
So I've lived and worked in states where boards are taken over, school systems are taken over. Ohio and Texas are kind of two of the more prominent ones. The Ohio legislature finally, about 4 to 5 years ago, issued a moratorium on state takeover of school boards and districts because what they were looking at was chronic urban struggles with students performing on standardized test, right? Children that are coming from homes that are not supporting achievement on a standardized test. And there's a very specific trend nationally that you can see the patterns. Houston School District, I'd worked with extensively, their board for a number of years. But I'd seen the state just kind of chomping at the bit to take them over. And finally they did. It took years, but finally they did. But the dilemma has been the state doesn't get better outcomes as measured by a standardized test than what the local people did. So whatever.
So they didn't matter. They took them over. It's like, okay, here we go. We're going to usher in an age of incredible performance. It's like, nah, they're still at like 15%.
Well, right. And Houston's a very interesting example because, you can move things around, move around the pieces, if you will, of the board and make it look different than what it was. But ultimately, it's about where's that balance with the local control over the local schools that really belong to the public locally, not per se the state. Like, where's that balance and how do we work it out?
And we have systems like charter school systems where even in the presence of locally elected individuals on school boards, there are still populations of parents and communities that say, hey, you know what? It still doesn't reflect us enough. Right. We're not getting enough of what we want. And that's the nature of, like charter schools. They're like, hey, we have this charter. It's going to be more reflective. There's a large enough population within this area that wants and agrees with what we're going to do. Let's have this state funded alternate system that runs in parallel. People want more and more and more representation.
Well, in charter schools in Idaho by a group, they're pretty phenomenal opportunities for some families, some students. I don't think they work for everybody.
Of course.
There's transportation. I was working with a charter board recently. They're not set up to serve any meals. So it's a problem for students and staff, right, to not be able to have a hot lunch. That's part of the program. But there are some shining examples. I just kind of call out a couple of them. Palouse Prairie up in Moscow. It's an experiential learning model. And you may want to interview somebody from there sometime.
We got to write this down.
They're a shining example of innovation. Right. And I just heard somebody this morning saying charter schools in Idaho are not innovative. Well, that's just not a true statement. That's not
whoever
true
said that just stopped.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't want to say more. But Palouse Prairie is just knocking it out of the park with science achievement, and they're doing really well overall, at the same time presenting kind of that Waldorf-y style of whole child development where they're concerned about the kids being happy, wanting to come to school, those kinds of things. Like they're getting those results. And I've seen another one that we've worked with a lot the last year, Blackfoot Charter School. Like they were really struggling academically, but they've pulled together. The board has committed to improvement. The administration is doing a phenomenal job there. Teachers have stepped up. And they're another example where we're just going to see the test scores, skyrocket from where they were to what they are. But I think we all need to stay reminded test scores aren't everything. They're just one indicator. Right? They're one indicator of a certain type of performance. They're probably not very predictive of lifelong success.
Right. And I think that's obvious. I mean, the state of Idaho has made a great investment in CTE because this was one criticism that I had of my former community, which is essentially you had a very large collection of very highly educated, tech-based employment. right? And parents. Those were the parents. So they had, advanced degrees. They were working in the tech fields and things of that nature. And because of that, they were compensated in an analogous manner. So you had people making hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the community became this area where only those people could exist. So you had these students who, represented a broad swath of the population. Yeah, maybe their parents all came from one type of thing, but they themselves had a varied set of interests and a varied set of skill sets. But their capacity to return to their hometown was pretty much dependent on whether or not they could enter this tiny funnel of hyper successful tech-oriented salespeople, for instance, things of that nature.
Sure. Yeah.
And it was a huge problem because it was like, well, listen, if you're saying that the only way I can exist here, and thrive in this area is if I do this tiny thing, like what if I'm interested in CTE types of things? What if I'm interested in more hands-on? Like I love woodworking. I have a cousin who's like an amazing blacksmith at 22 because he started going to like these, fairs at 12, and these old guys are like, oh, let me show you how to like swing a hammer. So now he can make like iron roses and stuff. Like I don't know how he does it. But again, I think Idaho realized quickly that it's like, we need people that can contribute and participate in our economy, but our economy is not solely wrapped around this one type of academic success, this one metric of either test scores or college success. It's like, listen, we can have success, lifelong success, thriving, contributing in a myriad of ways. That's the great thing about this state.
Well, we need all of these different vocations and opportunities. And as caring, concerned parents and citizens, we want to ensure that our children are able to pursue their options, their interests, right? Not pigeonholed into a certain track. So I was on a school board in Washington State, literally living kind of in the backdrop of Bill Gates and Microsoft. And in the early 2000s, it started in the 1990s, Bill Gates was consistently complaining about American school system not producing enough engineers, scientists to come to work for him and make money for him, right? And it's kind of a fascinating dilemma where he kind of had a point, but the rhetoric they would use comparing us to China or India with 1 billion plus people, right? But I'm thankful as a U.S. citizen that we get some of these exceptionally bright people from other countries that come and fill in gaps. But it's not realistic that everybody's going to be a tech engineer or a scientist. And the fact is, we've got a shortage of linemen, a shortage of welders. Most states in the country have a shortage of electricians, of plumbers, of dentists.
You ever call a plumber, Bill?
No, I know, right? There's
come on. My dad had this phenomenal joke that he always told me, and he's a physician, and he would always say like this, neurosurgeon calls a plumber. It's 2 in the morning. He wakes up, his toilet's a mess, all these things. And he gets on the phone with a plumber. He's like, oh my God, can you get here? And the guy's like, it's 2:30 in the morning, man. Like, yeah, man, I can get there. It's $300 an hour from the second I hang up the phone. And the neurosurgeon's like, $300 an hour? I don't even make $300 an hour. And the plumber's like, yeah, man, I didn't make $300 an hour when I was a neurosurgeon either. You want me to come or not? It's like,
I love that one.
There is that reality, which is, look, these are fine ways to make your way through the world. Like you can buy a house. I had one plumber. I worked with his granddaughter, and he was older and his wife had passed, and he was living with his daughter and his granddaughter, and I was helping her get ready for college. And he was this brilliant, super witty old English guy. And he's been a plumber for like 70 years or something. And he started in England and, knew how to pour hot lead to seal pipes, all of these different incredible things. Super brilliant and intelligent. Right. And he said sometimes he would go do work for the professors at UC Berkeley. They have a house on the hill and the toilet, whatever. And the professors would be bragging to this old British plumber guy about how much money they make, like $125,000. And he's like, they don't even know. Like, I'm just an idiot plumber. I make $250,000, and he's I just go to work and then I go home.
Well, it's an ironic subject because you've got me thinking about the plumbers I've had conversations with through the years and how brilliant many of them are. Former plumber school board member in the state of Connecticut who we became friends a long time ago, and thinking also of a plumber that I knew in Coos Bay, Oregon, who was just the most brilliant person I've ever had a conversation with, right? And him taking his choice, that's the point, right? Like it's not that these other jobs, garbage truck driver, whatever it is that society might look down on in the past, right? But, if the governor disappeared for a week or two, maybe Mrs. Little would notice, but a lot of people wouldn't, right? But if your garbage truck driver didn't show up for a week or two, right? People are just screaming mad, right? Those poor customer service people at the garbage truck places, right? So here's the point. How do we help our kids find their paths? Right? And something I heard years ago, how do we help prepare our children for their future, not our past? That's a struggle. And even as school board members, all of them went to school, right? All of them have varying levels of educational experience. Some may not have finished 8th grade, and others are neurosurgeons and have advanced degrees teaching in colleges and stuff. So there's a beauty there in the system where we've got folks from all walks of life coming together and contributing from their angle. I was working with a school board recently where a gentleman, he started talking about his experience in industrial management, and he was relaying it to the school board work and how they needed to adjust and think differently as a board toward the superintendent. And it was powerful. But I see that with farmers and ranchers in particular across the state of Idaho. They understand we plant things, we water things, we tend them, we keep an eye on it. We may have unexpected interruptions through weather, from water problems, whatever, the economy, tariffs, dare I say the word. We may have these. There's other things politically loaded I'm trying not to say. But
we have issues.
But the ranchers and farmers on school boards are some of the best school board members you could ever find. Terry from the dairy. You know Terry from the dairy?
No.
He's on the Emmett School Board. You need to know him. He's in his 80s.
I need to know Terry from the dairy.
Oh, he would light you up in this room because Terry speaks so plain and clear. He understands, he gets it. Again, it's this planting and tending and reaping. You got to sow the seed if you're going to have a crop. That's the type of wisdom that it takes for local school boards to make a difference for their kids.
So coming back to this, when you talk about expert citizens, it's like, this is what we need. We need somebody who is representative of community values, right? Has a real vested interest and understanding of the long-term benefit of an educated populace, and is not somebody who's like an ivory tower, whatever, who's removed from the community and doesn't really get. But we need people that are not necessarily educational specialists, because they got to be dealing with facilities, they got to be dealing with buses, they got to be dealing with curriculum, they got to be dealing with all these different things. And that's why you need a more broad, like expert jack of all trades, instead of this hyper specialized, like I'm really good at math kind of thing.
Exactly. Nationally, school boards have 25% of their members come from a background in education. I would guess that that's very similar in Idaho. School boards I work with, and it's okay to have somebody with a background working in education, administration, teaching, whatever, and they're on the school board. They're one voice out of 5 or 7, whatever the number is, and they're contributing. Well, here's what I experienced. That's great, right? But that educational expertise is what the board hires. It's not what they're supposed to bring. Right. So that they're having a conversation, again, across specters. My experience as a plumber has taught me this. My experience in business or management has taught me this. My experience as a farmer, rancher, we sort of bring that together, and it gives us a better, more representative outcome for our students and our families in our community.
God,
really important.
So knowing that we're going into a school board election season, right? Because we're going to have a lot of different, and again, people are on different polls, so we're not turning over the entire school board in any areas.
Right.
What are the big things that you would emphasize people look for coming into this?
We got to listen. Like, we've got to listen to how they speak, what they say, how they say it. And we've got to listen through, can this person work well with others? Right? Because, I mean, it's this silly thing. It's like, I read in the Wall Street Journal years ago, the garage mechanic, or excuse me, the politician boasts, I'm going to change the world. And the garage mechanic sneers, he can't even change a tire. No. It's like, right. So people, when they run for election, are sometimes going to make that mistake of, I'm going to change, I'm going to change, I'm going to change. School board members have zero authority. Zero. They can't do anything. They have less rights and privileges than an ordinary non-elected citizen, because they're constrained by some laws as to when they meet, how they meet, what they say, what they don't say, right? So the person that wants to be an activist, stay off the school board. You can have a better effect from the audience and working in your community. The person
because you can't go to the news and say all kinds of things. You can't.
Well, you shouldn't. You shouldn't. Right? And you may be legally constrained. I mean, we see board members struggle sometimes where they'll say something, no pun intended, really, but out of school. Well, here's a negative comment about a teacher, and then the teacher comes up for renewal or non-renewal, and the district has no choice but to renew them because the board member's already spoken out of turn, right?
And you had I can't remember his name, but one of the ACHD commissioners wrote something on Facebook. This happened like a day or two ago, and got censured. And here's a person that just says, and he's it's my understanding that this commissioner is very frustrated with the level of interference at a local highway district from the state level, right? Where it's like, wait a minute, what is the compelling interest of the state to start interfering with Ada County Highway? This is Ada County, like we're a county highway district, right?
Yeah, okay.
And again, I'm not saying I love all the things Ada County is doing, but we elect the commissioners, right? Just like we wouldn't want, for instance, the state legislators to start legislating things about, say, Nampa School District, specific to Nampa School District. It's like, wait, what's the compelling interest for the state to come in? And, again, to your point, this person wrote something on Facebook. You and I can write stuff on Facebook all day long.
Sure.
Nobody's going to censure us. Nobody's going to call for our termination or whatever. It's like, whatever, man. Yeah. So they're more constrained.
We don't get recalled. Yeah. They're more constrained.
Yeah. We don't get recalled.
So the person who is saying, I'm going to do, they don't know what they're doing. Right. So I think the public needs to be warned when a board member says, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that.
Or a candidate.
A candidate. Right. That's exactly right. Because they only have authority as a body in a duly, legally, appropriately called meeting with an agenda item that's already been scheduled, right? That's approved. And then they can talk about that and make changes. Right? They can't just willy-nilly change everything, whether it's, the popular ban books or fire a teacher, fire a coach or whatever. They have no authority to do that. Only the board, right? And that's a critical element that every board member has to learn. And very importantly, every superintendent and charter administrator has to learn it too. But it's not about what did one board member want, but what does the board want? That's the power. So a person has to have that ability to come together, talk reasonably appropriately. They can't be on the board overtly partisan. Now, when I say can't, they legally could be. They could legally put it out there every time, well, I'm a Republican or I'm a conservative or, go the other way. Sure. They could put that out there and say, because of that, I'm going to do this. Like, yeah, but that's not what it's about. It's about this whole common greater good. It's about representing the community's values, not just my individual values, right? So that can be a hard thing. Most of us as school board members have to go through that kind of transformation of realizing that we're not a solo actor here, but we've got to work well with other people. And that becomes so critical. So it's not about partisanship. It's not about traditional versus progressive. It's about what's the greater good, what works.
So that all being said, taking all of this into account, which is, look, you're not saving the world. You're not, because you're one of many people. You got to work together with these other people. You're not standing up just doing whatever you want. What are the things that are important then when, obviously how people talk, how they work together, all of those things, but like, what can we do? If we can work together as a board, is it, hey, look, I can work together with people But I personally would like to see a little bit more leaning this way, or a little bit a dash more of this, or, hey, look, I think actually what they're doing is good, but I actually bring an area of expertise that I think I could enhance the board's consideration here. Are those the types of things that people should be considering?
Yeah, I think so. Does this person represent a different subset of our community that's not currently represented on the board? That can be valuable, right? Do they speak the language, right? Do they have a grasp and understanding across sectors, but ultimately, can they work well with other people? Is it the brash, bully, my way or the highway kind of person? Go be a CEO of something, right? If you're that much of a solo actor, because everything about school board services is a collective. It's about doing it together. That said, individuals make a difference. Just like different fish in an aquarium change the chemistry of the whole fish tank, right? Like, so they're going to affect things. I can hang, not my hat, but your hat on a couple of things that I can say substantiate from the research. Here's what we need to consider individuals and collectively as a board. Board members with high expectations for kids, staff, and themselves are more likely to be governing a system that's improving in student achievement. So we can hang a body of research on that topic right there. School boards that have a plan, just a plan, make it that generic, right? The board as a whole having a plan is more likely to be governing a system that's improving in student achievement, right? Even just having a plan. But then within that, the more that they structure their plan to hold themselves first and the superintendent or charter administrator accountable, then the more likely they are to be leading a system that is improving in achievement. There's one additional piece that's been kind of an emerging bit of research I've been a part of. The more the board engages its community, students, staff, families. We can't just say parents, because we've got 10 to 20% of kids in Idaho that are not being raised by parents. They're being raised by grandparents, foster care, a variety of things. We've got to consider that. Let's talk about every kid. We hear parent all the time. And it's like, we're leaving 10 to 20% of kids out. So it's got to be, how does the board engage with parents, guardians, caregivers, meaningful adults in children's lives, and involve the community in the board's work? So I'm not talking about like school to family partnerships of, adults volunteering in classrooms, that kind of engagement. I'm not talking about school newsletters, but the board's work, setting a long-term vision, developing parameters for the budget, creating a strategic plan, having accountability and responsiveness. The more the board does that kind of community engagement, the more likely that the system is both improving in achievement overall and closing gaps in achievement. The piece that's been missing, and researchers have been looking at this for more than 20 years, and we've all talked in the rhetoric about community engagement, but we're finally starting to have some emerging studies to actually substantiate this, that the more the board is involving that whole community in the governance and oversight, the more likely that students are improving in achievement and gaps are closing. For me, it's revolutionary. Because it's like the secret rabbit, as somebody used to tell me that I was chasing. Like, how can a board govern and oversee in a way that improves achievement overall and brings up those bottom struggling students that are usually coming from much more difficult backgrounds? How do we make sure those children have opportunities too?
God, I love everything you just said. It makes complete sense to me. My biggest, I will tell you just from my own experience, my biggest criticism of my school board at this point is that I don't feel that they attempt to connect with me at all. I know 3 board members only because I interviewed them in 23 for the election. Right. And again, I interviewed all 8 people that were running, 3 different spots. And so I know those 3 people. Now, of the 3 people that were reelected that I interviewed, only one of them has come on to do additional interviews. And I have reached out to the board president, to the other board members. they have declined from coming on to engage in a conversation. I've never had a bad conversation with people. I don't harpoon people. There's nothing controversial. I'm not looking to get people, right? I've obviously provided a space for people to be heard, in their entirety and whatever positions they have. So that is my number one criticism. And I know other people in the community feel completely removed because, by the way, I've spoken with all of all 8 candidates and then the 3 that got on. Most people, the only interaction they've had is from the podcast. They call me because they're like, I know you know these people. I'm like, I wouldn't say I know them, but they don't have that connection. They don't have that communication, and they don't feel like their positions are being considered because they don't have one or two-way communication with these people, and that is one of those things that it's so clear. I don't know how you solve it because I think, or you would know better, but I do think some board members are very concerned about like, well, I can't speak for the board and I don't, want to get hung up in this bad thing and get the district in bad position. It's like, okay, I understand caution, but at some point there needs to be connection. There needs to be a human connection where people feel like, okay, look, maybe I don't even agree with everything the school board's doing, but I understand the reasoning. I understand it. Like this person explained it to me and yeah, I'd skin the cat a different way, but the intent is going down this way and dang, it's really complex too, by the way, because I was on the phone for half an hour and I was like, my head was spinning with data. It's like, okay, great. That's the conversation that needs to be had 1,000 times over.
Yeah, I see your concern. I've had the privilege here in Idaho, just in the last 3 months, to facilitate 3 large community listening sessions. Board, parents, families, students, teachers, staff in the room, talking about issues, concerns, that inability to feel heard. Like one of the dilemmas is because my advice to you would be go to a school board meeting and make a very similar statement to what you just said. Like, I feel like community engagement is missing. I want to engage with you. I want you to engage with your community. Like put it out there. But as I say that, I know generally it's extremely dissatisfying to go make public comment for any public body, and they're not legally allowed to speak back and forth about your concern, particularly if it's not a topic on the agenda. Sometimes the emotion or you may have board members sitting there at the table that agree with you, but they don't even dare say that because maybe, again, they're kind of walking a thin line of trying to stay compliant with the law. And so a lot of times, I'll encourage board chairs, thank people when they come and make a comment, even if it's just venomous, like thank them for taking time to care to come to speak to you. And, school boards in general could improve in this area. Make sure somebody in the next 24 to 48 hours follows up with that person, writes them a letter, an email, says, thank you for sharing your concerns. We're going to get back to you within the next, whatever it is, week, month, whatever could be a big thing, could be a small, but 99% of the times it's stuff that could just be checked off, right? Like, we didn't know that, or we were unaware, or anyway. So the follow-up is huge. But obviously smaller local communities, not consolidated districts, but singular communities that have a public school, it becomes so much more paramount that conversation, engagement, involvement back and forth. There will always be differences of opinion. Right? There'll always be a different perspective. The board's going to have to vote. They may vote and have a split vote, right? They may not be unanimous, and that's okay. But the board voted. The board made a decision. So when it comes to looking for school board members, you want to say, is this person somebody that I can engage with? Could I, if I wanted to, have access to them? A phone call, a meeting. Will they participate in such a way? And trying to think of a simpler term than democratizing, but will they as an individual contribute to good democratic practices? Listening, asking open-ended questions, not using sarcasm or snide remarks or rude things back and forth with fellow board members or anyone else. Will they be able to listen, to hear, to thoughtfully consider ideas that aren't their own, right? And will they, I think partly to your point, will they be approachable?
Right.
Like can I sit down and have a cup of tea or whatever and chat with them?
And I think it really needs to be said. The flip side of it is, are you being a good member of the community when you engage with your school board?
Yes.
Right.
Like, yeah. It's onus is on both sides.
Like you're sitting here and I'm not on the school board. I'm not paid by school boards. Like I'm just throwing this out here that I spend all day asking questions and learning. Right. Before you were in here, I had a gentleman who runs a nonprofit called So Good. The things he was explaining to me is wild. I have, other people coming in after, and I'm like a sponge all day long. And people come to me with problems very frequently. I'm like, okay, I hear, and it could be about anything. It could be about water, could be about education, could be about law enforcement. Like cross industry. It's like, okay, people, engage with me. One day last week, before I finished my first cup of coffee, 3 people reached out to me. One person was somebody very concerned about the data center in Kuna. One person was from Eastern Idaho, where they have a recharge site, aquifer recharge site that's screwing up some domestic wells. And one person was from Coeur d'Alene, worried about the Coeur d'Alene school district.
Wow.
People are cross industries, right? Sure, which is interesting. Sure. But when you go, yes, I want my board members to hear me when I go.
Yeah.
But the other thing I need as I leave is understanding of why things are happening the way they are too. And if we as a community go to our board members and try to engage in one-way communication, which is I'm going to unload this hypercharged, message to you, and I'm not interested in even remotely understanding the complexity of what's happening, then you pointed out, I've heard people criticize board members for just sitting there and staring at us. And I go up and they don't even say anything. And it's like, okay, you realize they can't say anything. Like they're legally obligated to be quiet and listen to you. And they're staring right at you because you're talking and you're mad that they're not talking back to you. They can't even do that. And they're I had no idea.
Well, and the rattlesnake venom you just threw at them 15 minutes ago, right?
Yeah.
Your moment of the spotlight.
Yeah. It's like we have to be willing as a community to understand, wow, these are really complex systems. And if we just come at it from a perspective of, I need to tell them what I know because I'm so right and things need to change instantaneously. One, the person you're talking to cannot act, as you've pointed out, in a silo. They can't go and just push the button and have everything change. Two, have a tad bit of humility and recognize that maybe this is really involved. Like I didn't know anything about bus systems or steel roofs or anything until I started talking to board members in 2020. And I was like, oh, wow, this is crazy. Or one of the big mantras was that there was the outgoing superintendent for the 5 months until he left had gotten a Me Too raise. So the teachers union had negotiated a raise and that applied to the administration. He got this pay increase. People were up in arms and furious about it. Well, it turns out it's like, no, this is how, you can not like this system, but this is the system that had been negotiated decades ago. This is how it's always done. And by the way, that raise that you're really upset about literally accounted for about $500 a month. So in the $500 million budget, it's a $500. And when that got explained to people, they're like, oh, I guess it's really not that big of a deal. But people were so worked up about it. It's like, yeah, let's learn. Let's come to the table to learn.
Well, you almost said something you were touching on here just a moment ago. We all have to remember these are people too.
Right.
These are human beings. They're not paid. They're elected volunteers. They're sitting there trying to do the good work of the community that somebody has to do, right? And they are our fellow citizens. So if we kind of accept that up front, I just say a little bit more about school board members in general. I've been one. I've been working with them pushing 25 years now. But I don't know if I mentioned this before. I had an interest in being on the school board since I was 8 years old.
That's new.
So I've been paying attention, if you will, right, and watching for a long, long time. And you see these folks who are generally, right, pillars of the community. They're the Terry from the Dairy people, right?
I gotta meet this guy.
You gotta
Terry
meet,
from the Dairy,
and that's the way he'll introduce himself. But they've been there, they care, they're vested, they own property. Oftentimes across the state of Idaho, they're multi-generational. So I was with a board member recently whose father had been on the school board. Her grandfather had been on the school board. Now she's on the school board. Like, these are kids that grew up. Now they're adults. They're kids that grew up with a sense of service, of giving back. And you ask board members across the country, why do they serve? The number one thing they will say is public education was good to me, and I just want to give something back. Right. So we need to kind of keep that framing understanding in mind. They come from all walks of life. We've touched on that a little bit. Some are not well educated. Some are extremely well educated. But they're there trying to serve. And in a lot of our smaller communities, they're struggling to find people interested in school board service. Right. I mean, who wants to sit at the table and be yelled at? Like, right. Or if you've got a business and you're going to have to make tough decisions. Maybe you're a realtor, maybe you're whatever, right? But you're going to have to make tough decisions. And when you make that decision, when you vote a certain way, you might lose customers, you might lose money. It's going to cost you, right? And so who wants that? I mean, and what we have to do, and I get to do weekly, is talk with school boards about how they make a difference and the opportunities they have to make a difference for kids. And when we can focus on those opportunities to make a difference for kids, then we can tolerate a lot of challenge, a lot of frustration, a lot of ambiguity, right? There's so much ambiguity right now in the public sentiment toward education and educators, federal funding. Nobody in their right mind has the expectation. I'm just going to say this. Nobody in their right mind has the expectation that a block of money coming to the state of Idaho from the federal government with the dismantling of the Department of Ed, nobody has the expectation that all of that money will go where it needs to go. That's not the trend, right? The expectation is that some of it's going to go to other things that people think are good and fine. So I'm saying this, we're going to see a reduction in school funding and budget this year, and it's going to be really problematic in the following fiscal year. So who wants to step up and serve on a school board with the public sentiment toward public education that's been very powerfully eroded by elites in our country, and realizing more difficult times are coming in different ways? That's pretty heavy. Sorry.
No, I think it is the reality.
Yeah.
I think the general populace needs to start recognizing, and I find myself falling prey to this too. We collectively need to start realizing that we as a community have started making positions that are very, very important and very fundamental to everyday happenings, things that are just untenable, that you just can't, like you pointed out, people are mad at public education. We're going to get mass reduction in funding, most likely. We're going to have all of these problems to navigate. Who wants to step up and be like, oh, I'll be the person that everybody calls when they're mad about things I can't affect at all, right? And you see the same thing, same problem, with teachers. You see the same problem with nurses. You see the same problem with law enforcement. Like you see, and I think from a law enforcement standpoint, we're very fortunate in this state to have more positive sentiment towards law enforcement in general. Right. But the state that shall not be named that I came from did not. And you saw a mass exodus of people from there. And the people that hung in, some family members of mine that hung in law enforcement, have just taken it on the chin. And we got to get back to, it's like, hey guys, we're all people, and we need all of us to participate. We need all of us to work. And if we make these positions so intolerable and we make them so painful for people, Secretary of State Phil McGrain had this great point. It's like, we will just see a decrease in quality and willingness of people to run for these positions. We need to make it a safer place.
That's right.
Not one without argument, not one without justification and great vigor, and let's run campaigns.
Put it on the table.
Right. Yeah. But even I remember this was something as a younger man. I believe I was 25 when John McCain was running against Barack Obama. And I remember seeing this clip of a woman stood up at like a town hall thing with John McCain and criticized for Barack Obama for being a Muslim something or other. And McCain stopped her. And he was like, no. Yeah. He's not. Yeah. He's a good man. We disagree on things, but he is a good man. And God, that just that was it. That was dignity.
Yeah.
Ferocious competition. McCain was a good man. Obama was a good man. That was what we need to get back to.
We do so desperately, and it's not what sells, right? I mean, John McCain wasn't elected.
Right. He lost.
And maybe if he'd have been a more vicious attacker, maybe less civil, right? Maybe he would have been elected. I don't know. You know, it's history now, but it was fascinating to watch his grace. And we've had some other politicians in recent years nationally who have navigated that kind of integrity. Very polarizing for me to mention some names at this point.
Sure.
You know,
everybody can find one.
That's who we need on school boards. People that can walk that fine line. I'm not going to bash my opponent because they're vying for a position on the same team. Right? I'm not going to bash my opponent. They want to be on this team. They want this position. I want it too. I think I'm better at it. Let me tell you why, not why they're bad at it. Like, right? But we see that, and sadly, it works.
You know, if I may, I can give you a local example. I interviewed all of the three men running for fire commissioner in Eagle Fire District.
Sure.
All three of them complimented the other candidates.
Love it.
All three of them were like, listen, you pick any of us, you got a good option. I think I could bring this specific thing. Two gentlemen did not come from fire. They're like, I'm not a firefighter, but I do have these expertise and these skill sets.
Yep.
You know, then like, it was just like out of all of the interviews I had done with the mayor, city council, like, then to have these last three people come in and be positive and try to showcase how they would be perhaps a greater asset instead of saying I'm the only asset. Right. I was like, gosh, this is great. Why couldn't all the conversations have been this?
Yeah. You know, it makes me wonder, Matt, maybe this is something you and I should take up, but we need almost like community upswell of getting candidates to sign a pact. Like, it's non-binding, obviously, but make an agreement. We're not going to attack somebody based on their heritage. We're not going to attack them based on their looks, their spouse's looks, their marital status. We're not going to attack somebody's family and children. Like, right, here's things that are just off the map. We are going to commit as candidates to not discuss our opinion about that attribute of the other candidate. I think it would do our state a great service if we could make that happen.
Do you recall the answers in 2015 when Hillary Clinton was campaigning? There was a debate between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, and the moderator at the end was like, "Can each of you say something nice to each other?" And I think it was I think Hillary complimented Trump's children, and I think Trump complimented Hillary's ferocity.
Okay.
And he was like, she's a fighter.
Yeah.
You know, and I just, it's like, I don't know why that stuck with me. It was just so,
I remember the moment.
So contentious. It was so nasty. And then it's like, can you just
say one good thing?
Can you just say one nice thing? And it's like, they mustered every ounce of like, this is the hardest question of the night. You know, and I love that idea. It would be a non-binding thing, but again, I'm planning on if people participate, obviously doing a myriad of elections this fall, and I absolutely I would make that a centerpiece, which is, hey, look, I would love to bring positivity to this, and I'll do it on air. It's like, listen, thank you for coming today. I would like this to be the most positive campaign conversation possible. Let's talk vigorously. Let's talk specifics. Let's not make fun of his haircut or like his marital status or her marital status. Like that would be great.
Yeah. I would encourage you to make that part of those interviews with school board candidates this fall. Like ask them either, tell me one good thing about each of your other candidates, or ask them, would you make a promise not to say bad things about your fellow candidates, right?
Right.
Again, they're all vying for a position on the same team. So how silly it would be if we'd watch, the Minnesota Vikings or whomever, and people vying for positions or trash talking their, their fellow teammate, like, right? Because we're all in this together.
This is really embarrassing. I don't even know what sport that is.
Football.
Okay.
Yeah. Had to stop and think. It was just I've got grandkids in Minnesota, so it was like first thing that came to mind.
I don't watch a lot of professional sports.
Oh, okay. Well,
no, it's okay. Like I get it because I play sports. That's the problem.
Sure.
I have my own journey.
Yeah.
I'm not like, and nobody's watching me.
Same here.
Yeah.
Same here.
Fantastic.
I'm much more interested in playing, participating, doing something.
I have
than
my own
watching.
hero's journey, man. Like I'm on my own heroic path. So are you. Like, and God bless it. We need to get after it. Yes.
Legends in our own mind. There we go.
Thank you for coming in today. Listen, I've so enjoyed this. Again, round 2. You're 2 for 2, my guy.
All right, good.
You're gonna have to keep coming back in. But again, bottom line, a lot of considerations when considering the school board, why the school board exists, why it's important that it continues to exist, and we have the best possible expert citizens elected to it that we can rely on.
We just need people to care who's on the school board, even when it's not contentious, right? Like notice that it does matter. It makes a difference not only for those children in these years, but as you talked about earlier, years to come and the community as a whole. Everybody benefits from a better educated citizenry across the state. And so I think we need to lean into that and say, rather, what can I make fun of or criticize? What could I do to make a difference? How could I contribute? Maybe, so I don't think it would hurt anything if citizens started bringing cookies to school board meetings and setting them up there on the table and saying, hey, I just had you on my mind. I was thinking about you. Thought you might enjoy a good, fresh chocolate chip cookie.
That is a terrible idea. And I will tell you why. I have a dear friend who's a retired firefighter. And he was like, yeah, people used to bring things to the firehouse, but we never knew if they were kept at the right temperature.
I know.
Don't bring the cookies. Don't take anything. Maybe a Starbucks gift card.
Buy them in a package.
Buy it.
Sorry.
God bless it.
I understand. Thanks.
Dr. Phil, thank you for coming in today. Thanks for sharing your knowledge, and let's please do this again.
It's always a pleasure.